All right, I just saw a patient in my office today, and she was told by her doctor that her laboratory tests were normal. But yet she was still suffering with so many symptoms. She'd been gaining weight for a number of years. She had foggy thinking. She felt that her moods were off. She'd noticed that her menstrual cycles were changing as well. And frankly, she just didn't feel like she had the energy to do the things that she wanted to do. But yet her doctor assured her he'd done all the laboratory testing he needed to do and everything looks good. So tell me, do you guys understand what this is like? Because sadly, so many people are going into their conventionally trained medical doctors and saying, doc, I don't feel that good. But conventional medicine, as we know it, and this is the medicine that's run through most hospitals and most insurance companies, doesn't have the ability to answer the questions of why we're not feeling well. I mean, has your doctor ever done a test on you to measure your degree of fatigue? Of course not. It doesn't exist. And what I have found is this is due to two primary causes. The first cause is just a limited repertoire from which to do laboratory testing. I mean, sadly, the conventional medical visit, even if you do laboratory testing at all, is just going to be something basic. It's, maybe your doc is going to measure a chemistry panel, a blood count, and some of the old-fashioned lipid studies. But none of this is going to give you the insight into why you're not feeling well. Now, the second thing is what I like to refer to as the red-green laboratory paradox. And as many of you know, a lot of the main labs are giving results that are shown like in red or green. I mean, normal results are green and abnormal are red. But what typically happens in so many doctors' offices is that they look at the lab, their eyes scan down from the top to the bottom, they see all green, and they go, okay, everything's fine, you're well, go home, and you need to go suffer with another 6 months or a year of not feeling well. So the purpose of this video is to show you a couple of critical steps that you need to take to be able to really understand what your labs are showing you. And by the end of this video, you're going to have a better understanding of the steps that you can begin to take to really start to regain your health and your wellness. My name's Scott Resnick, and I'm a medical doctor. I'm making these videos to simplify complex science and to give you guys the tools that you need to have full agency over your own health. And today we're talking about some basics around laboratory testing, particularly around this, this concept of fatigue, because it's so hard. And as I mentioned, there's not a solid test for fatigue. There's not a laboratory marker that we can do. There's not even an online assessment that most people have accessible to really understand what's going on with their level of fatigue. So what I like to do is when I think about laboratory testing, there are two fundamental steps. The first fundamental step is to ensure that your laboratory testing is evaluated within the context of a clinical assessment. Now, a clinical assessment is taking some time to ask, how's your sleep? What do you eat? When is your energy high? When is it low? How is your bowel function working? Because when we just start sending off laboratory tests willy-nilly, that begins to develop somewhat of a slippery slope. Yeah, laboratory tests need to be done in concert with a clinical evaluation. They can't be done in a vacuum. So now that you have this clinical assessment, something to hang your hat on, I like to divide laboratory testing into three general categories. And these are nutritional, metabolic, and environmental. So let's go over these. So the first is nutritional. As you guys know who follow this channel, I like to use something known as the health systems pyramid, and foundational to this is something called nutrition. Nutrition is so important to ensure that our body runs well. So how do you expect your metabolic pathways to run correctly? How do you expect your body to make energy, to detoxify, to absorb food from your gut if these metabolic requirements aren't taken care of? So when we think about nutritional markers, there are a few that I think are absolutely essential for anybody who wants to get a handle on their health. These are important markers like a full iron study, and this is like iron and a TIBC and iron saturation. Be sure that you measure your red blood cell magnesium and not your serum magnesium. Vitamin D is so important. I mean, so many of us are living in parts of the world where we don't get enough sunshine, and we're wearing clothes and we're wearing sunscreen. And I can tell you across the board, everybody's vitamin D is low, so be sure to get it measured. Now, the next thing is something like vitamin B12, and you'd be surprised how many people actually have B12 as well. And Along those lines, I like measuring something known as homocysteine. Now, this isn't measuring an actual vitamin level, but what this is doing is it's making a measurement of how well your vitamin B6 and B9 and B12 are working. It's a functional test. And if your homocysteine is greater than like 10 or 12, you got to get to work on that and check out some of my videos on this channel to teach you how to do that. Now, the next step is what I like to refer to as our energetic laboratory tests as well. And this similarly is foundational in my health systems pyramid. And there are 3 hormones that work collectively with one another to make energy for the body. And these are cortisol and insulin and thyroid. Now, let's start with cortisol. As so many of you know, cortisol is known as our primary stress hormone. But a real stressor to a human animal is not being chased by a tiger, it's running out of food. So cortisol's primary job is to maintain our body's blood glucose levels. It makes sense that if our cortisol isn't working well, that our blood glucose levels aren't going to be stabilized, and it should be no surprise that you should be expecting to hear some of these fatigue-related symptoms. The next thing that's so important is insulin, and counter to cortisol, which increases our body's blood sugar, insulin's job is to lower our body's blood sugar. So when you've eaten a big meal, what that insulin does is it takes those extra calories out of your blood and stores them for a rainy day. And the third energetic hormone is thyroid hormone. And so when you're measuring labs for thyroid hormone, you got to know that you're doing this right. And so often, this is one of the places where I see conventionally trained doctors measure a TSH and say, go home, you're fine, your TSH is 3.5. Meanwhile, that person is struggling with hypothyroidism. So to understand your thyroid health, you need to measure a TSH, a free T3, and a free T4. These are the free hormones that are accessible to the cells. Now, for somebody who's been under a lot of stress or somebody who is on a lot of thyroid hormone replacement with T4, I recommend doing something called a reverse T3, which is kind of T3's doppelganger. And finally, be sure at least once in your life to make a measurement of TPO and TG, and these are the markers for Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which are markers for autoimmunity. And for insulin, it's important to not only measure your basal, your blood sugars when you're fasting, but also to measure a hemoglobin A1C and a fasting insulin. Basically, the lower your fasting insulin, the better, and you want to be shooting for a fasting blood sugar under about 85 and a hemoglobin A1C maybe, 5.2 to 5.4 or lower. Those are optimal levels. Now, the third category of labs are the environmental studies. So once you've established that your nutritional state is good, that you are energetically balanced, it's important to look to the factors that could be contributing from the environment. So when I consider environmental factors, one of the primary ones is our exposure to microbes that could be causing a disease. And I don't mean the kind of disease where you know that you're sick. I mean, this might be, maybe you've got an infected tooth that hasn't been diagnosed yet. There are people out there walking around with chronic Epstein-Barr virus or human herpes virus 6. There are some people that might have Lyme disease, and this is why it's so important to consider this in regard to where you live. I mean, somebody who lives in upstate New York or Pennsylvania might be at risk of having been exposed to the tick that causes Lyme disease. But if you're in a part of the country that never sees Lyme, it probably doesn't do any good to be measuring that laboratory testing. Another important consideration is the presence of something like mycotoxins. I mean, if you live in Phoenix, Arizona, where it's 110 degrees in the summer, you probably don't have a lot of exposure to some of these mycotoxins. I mean, we all get it exposed on our food. But if you're somewhere where you're living in a rainy environment, where your house smells musty and moldy, there might be some mold in the building that's contributing to your illness. So in this video, you can see that when you start to add a clinical history in concert to the laboratory testing and then do the right laboratory tests, we can begin to get the information that we need to turn around our health. And I'm making these videos to give you guys agency. Now, if you want to know exactly where your functional health stands, I've put together a really simple little 5-question at-home 2-minute self-assessment where you can run through a couple of simple measurements and questions that you can reflect upon in the privacy of your own home and know where your health is functionally, somewhere between optimal health to something not quite as well. And that's found in the description below, and I'll see you guys there.